Welcome back to the show. We're talking about some new efforts at reviving the stalled Middle East peace talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians. China is now offering to help. We continue now with our panel. And let me go to Abdelhamid Siyam in New York. And Abdelhamid, as Dan Arbell told us a moment ago, the Israelis got something of a gift from the United States with that recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. What kind of concession would level the playing field? What kind of concession would the Palestinians like to see from the United States?
I mean, the Palestinians first want to see a reversal of that major decision. I mean, as recently President Trump wrote in one of his Twitter that Palestinians should come back to the negotiating table, having moved Jerusalem off the table, they should come back. So what kind of irony? You move Jerusalem off the table and you tell the Palestinians to come back. Or we're going to cut off the aid. And we're going to cut off the aid not only from the Palestinians, but also from UNRWA. UNRWA, which an agency that deals with the Palestinian refugees. That's a recipe for destruction, completely. Destruction, the issue of refugees and destruction of the Palestinian Authority. What the Palestinians hope to see, that a reversal, that they should come back and say, however, we recognize it theoretically, but Jerusalem is still on the table. If the two parties go back to the original peace talks and the final status issues, including Jerusalem, we will support them. But they have to show more neutrality. I mean, the people who are surrounding President Trump, which is a Greenblatt, and David Friedman, and his son-in-law Kushner are very close to the Israeli politics. They have been involved in settlement activities. Okay. Now, Friedman, the ambassador, told the Department of State not to use the word occupied territories. So what incentive that the Palestinians could receive that convinced them to go back to the negotiation table? There must be some kind of major reversal of this this bias policy.
And that's the kind of concession that the Palestinians would want. Geoffrey.
Yeah, that might be what they want, but the genie is out of the bottle and we can't put it back in. This is the decision that President Trump made. It creates a fait accompli. There's no way back from the decision of the United States to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. For better or for worse, it's done. There's no political appetite in the United States today or ever to revisit that. In fact, as we remember, the origin of this was the U.S. Congress. So there's no political energy or will now or ever to reverse a decision that, in my view, is among the most historic decisions that have been made on this
Geoffrey,
last century.
Does point to something else. There is now a growing body of opinion here in the United States that is questioning the viability of a two-state solution. And you heard that debate grow even more intense after that announcement that Jerusalem will be recognized.
Absolutely. And we see that this is an environment where there is a cost to the failure of to resolve this issue and still in the region or elsewhere. And people may forget, but it was not long ago that there was no international consensus supporting the creation of an independent Palestinian state. Even during most of the Oslo process, which began the reconciliation between Israel and the Palestinians, until the end of the Clinton administration in the year 2000, and more formally with George Bush after that, there was no American position in favor of a separate Palestinian state. So what many people may consider as a fixed lodestar in this universe misunderstands the viability of a permanent support for an independent Palestinian state. The time may well have passed when that kind of idea is the one that animates the diplomacy and efforts to fix the relationship between the two parties.
Victor, China has good relations with both the Israelis and the Palestinians, as you pointed out a moment ago. But what kind of leverage does China have? What kind of tough diplomacy can China bring to these negotiations to get these two sides together?
I think, first of all, to have a very more balanced and longer view, historically speaking, for this dispute will be highly necessary. We know that over the past 2,000 years, control of Palestine region has changed hands again and again and has been a center of wars on many fronts, causing huge amount of casualties on all fronts, basically. Therefore, for Israel to really be very much a country viable for its survival in that particular part of the region, that survivability need to be established on peace rather than based on more and more oppression of the Palestinian people. This is very philosophical, and I think the Chinese side is very good at this kind of historical and philosophical perspective and analysis. That means if Israel really wants to achieve longevity for their statehood, for their survivability as a government, as a regime, as a country, they need to really deal with the Palestinians and show enough respect for the legitimate interests of the Palestinian people, because otherwise the crisis will be long-lasting and Israel will constantly fear for its survivability or not. And therefore, I think the Chinese side can bring in this kind of philosophical perspective, historical perspective, argue more for peace rather than for instant gratification of any side's special needs.
Dan, what about Victor's point that Israel needs to look at this a little bit more philosophically, that it might be shooting itself in the foot by expanding settlements, by lauding the recognition of Jerusalem as its capital?
So I think Victor made a few important points. I think that also I would add to that Chinese economic contribution to a process. For instance, taking on the Gaza challenge and helping in bringing Chinese construction companies and helping out, the rehabilitation of Gaza. There are many things that China can do, and it can provide philosophical, historical context. But we've been through this before. As you know, about 15 years ago, the International Middle East Quartet was established, including Russia, UN, the European Union, and the US. And we've gone through this sort of an international coalition which deals with the Middle East process. But it soon became apparent that the US is the leading force in that international coalition. If China is willing to, first of all, play a supporting role at first, and then make its way up, and perhaps one day take a more substantial role in the very essence of the process itself.
Abdul Hameed, let me get your view on something that Geoffrey Aronson said a moment ago, and that is the declaration of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, something that the United States will now recognize, is a fait accompli. That's not going to be reversed. It's not going to be rescinded.
I just want to say a few things. First, that this decision is in violation, a flagrant violation of international law, including certain Security Council resolutions which were adopted with the consent of the United States, such as Resolution 478 of 1980, which was let go without a US veto. There are many other resolutions. The second, this position has been very isolated from the international community. US found itself in the Security Council 1 against 14. What made the US believe that it's on the right side or on the right side of history? On the GA, when there was a vote, there was 128 countries voted to not to accept this decision, and only the US found a few small countries like Nauru, Palau, Guatemala, and a few others next to it. So in fact, even though they adopted this decision, it's an isolated one. It's only the US decision. It's not the international community decision. Even the closest allies to the United States disagree with the US. And with mounting pressure from countries like China, Russia, European Union, and many other countries, this decision will remain isolated, and maybe a new administration comes in after the Trump administration, and they might look back to this decision and see the damage it made to the US itself and its influence around the world.
Okay, Geoffrey, what do you make of that view? Is the United States, in this particular issue, is the United States, and by extension Israel, on the wrong side of history?
Well, one can agree with everything that Abdul Hameed said.
Yeah.
about the historical record and the violation of the international consensus that this decision makes, signals. But that, in and of itself, does not alter the observation I made, which is, notwithstanding all of these arguments, it's a done deal. And there's no way that the U.S., that I can see, is going to be convinced or compelled to repudiate a decision of this magnitude.
But it was a bit of a nuanced statement, wasn't it? Because on the American part, because President Trump did say this does not mean that this is going to be the final.
I'll refer you to something else that was historically important in this conflict, something called the Balfour Declaration, which was issued in 1917, announcing British support at that time for what they called a Jewish home in Palestine. Now, that was accompanied by a caveat, which was, we won't do anything to prejudice the rights of the local people. And we all know how that turned out. So I would find cold comfort in such a suggestion.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for another edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.